So today what we're talking about are the sections of the IMRaD paper. So I just asked GPT to write the different sections, and then I kind of assessed them in comparing them with a paper that I just have forthcoming. And then I've tried to color code what GPT is not good at, and then things that we should maybe be a bit careful with, and then what GPT is good at. So we've got the classic traffic light colors there. It's a really mixed bag. I've also got some other AI tools in there and a couple of options for possible policies we might want to use. All right, so let me begin with citations. As you know, GPT isn't good with citations. It makes them up, and I got into this crazy loop where the first citation would be wrong, so it would literally patch write a citation. It would take this set of authors, the first set of authors from one place. It would take bits of the title from elsewhere and the journal and the other information from a third place. And then when I said this is wrong, it would say, oh, here's a real reference, but the real reference would be irrelevant. It wouldn't be on the topic. And so I got caught in that loop, and it did that 12 times in a row. Okay, so bottom line, we have to be quite careful with student citations, and we do need to check them. In terms of content, it favors the 5-paragraph format because it wants to give about 500 words. So it writes all of these very short paragraphs with extremely basic information and very simplistic analysis. If you were actually doing a course on vaccine hesitancy, this would be like week 1 lecture content. There's almost no actual content involved. So given that we want IMRaD papers to be a little more sophisticated and have a bit more of a fine lens to them, that's something that we need to be aware of. This is a data visualization that I use in Voyant Tools. And this is the average content word frequency per 10 segments. Segment is like a clause. So this is GPT on the left, and this is my article, DeCourcy Longmaid on the right. Okay, so you can see that GPT is using the same words repeatedly and doesn't use a whole load of other content words as compared to a real article. In fact, there are much better AI tools out there if your objective is to get a good summary and overview of the literature prior to writing a lit review. So in the medical world, doctors have to summarize extensive medical records and medical consultations all the time. There are really good AI-powered tools that use natural language processing out there. And what they will do is they will identify the important content words. They will retain the grammatical relationships. They will hierarchize phrase for importance. And so they build a much better summary. Now, that said, there are some summarizers that use phrases from the articles, so they build it with the exact phrases. So this is a plagiarism problem. There's a danger of plagiarism there. But that actually makes a really good exercise to do with students, where they find out which summarizers work well and don't give them that problem, and which summarizers do give them that problem. All right, so here's an example. This is what I went to this particular summarizer, and this is what it did with my article. So I put in my 1,200 word introduction, and it gave me a 1-paragraph summary in 1 minute. Okay, so for use with 210 students, and that's who I'm talking about in the main here, with 210 students, that's a really good place to start. All right, so that's in green. That's green for go. Now, at the end of the lit review, you either have RQs or hypothesis. So RQs are framed, research questions are framed using field-specific concepts. Essentially, GPT has nothing much to offer. So option number 1 is, in fact, a hypothesis, which expects a number as an answer. Number 2 is too broad. You could not possibly do all of these things. You would have to have a budget of $1 million and a team of 100 in 5 years. Number 3 is even worse. You can't possibly do all of that stuff. Number 4, also too broad. 5, 6, and 7 are viable. The question is then, how do we oversee students? They're going to generate 10 topics and have stars in their eyes and want to do all kinds of things. And then we need to talk to them about what is viable. For example, number 5, interviewing people about, whatever it is the topic is. Okay, that's a nice project for a 210 student. The suggestion to observe behaviors can be socially delicate in some contexts, and that's something that we should teach. And number 7, depends on what interventions are meant, but some of them are viable. Number 8 is completely vague, and number 9 and 10 are interesting, but that's law and ethics, not actually social science. All right, so when I asked it for hypotheses, it gave me a bunch of stuff. So these are things that you test out that expect a number as a result. Most are conceptually extremely basic. So again, that's okay for undergrads in 210. If you get a list of options and that are really basic, people in 210 can do it. But I know that some people are dealing with graduate students. So Adina will join us later, but she's teaching this to grad students. And all of these are too general to be used with grad students because they need to be a lot more focused. Still, what we can say is that if you want RQs or hypotheses, then GPT, at least for undergrads, is a place to start. All right, so when you start and you're not satisfied, you ask it for further information. So I asked it, how would I find out factors relating to vaccine hesitancy among unlicensed medicine sellers? Okay, so this is our project in Cambodia that we're publishing on. And GPT says, to find out factors related to vaccine hesitancy among unlicensed medicine sellers, you could conduct a survey or interview study with a sample of unlicensed medicine sellers, and then it gives me some steps. And then I'm in the same loop that I got into with how to write a good survey, and that was discussed in talk 1. And basically, GPT is rubbish at it. So then I asked, well, what questions should I ask? And it completely misses all of the local context. So there's no local knowledge. In the developing world, selling medicine basically reflects whether you're in a city or the countryside. In Cambodia, there's this thing, Jeonju dual practice, where these people work for low-paid public sector employees. They know exactly what they cannot say to anybody asking questions because they are afraid of the scrutiny. So if you want to find out the real answer to these questions, you have to know how to do it, and you have to ask questions indirectly. So that's an issue of local knowledge. Also, these questions are extremely vague in general. So one way to think about this is the topic is what an article is about, but the focus of the article is based on what is already predicated knowledge. There's a huge amount of predicated knowledge about vaccine hesitancy in the developing world. But GPT writes like there's almost nothing already known. So it's that whole problem with overly general and simplistic. So then I asked it, well, what if I wanted to do this in Cambodia? It said, well, you would need to consider the local context. Well, thank you very much. I know that. But then it wasn't able to tell me anything about the local context. It said that I should consider language and culture and the regulatory environment and so on. Okay, so in fact, there are more than 17,000 articles that are relevant here, many of which I have cited, and they deal with very specific aspects of, for example, culture. So when I asked GPT about culture in Cambodia, it said characterized by strong family ties, respect for elders, and deep reverence for religion and spirituality. So again, you're in that recursivity loop where you're just getting general comments, where in fact, loads of very specific and interesting data is out there. There are also very interesting and salient historical events that are recent. So the whole thing with Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. All right, so also the way GPT writes, it's like it doesn't realize that in developing economies, essentially there's no regulation. Healthcare as a system, pharmacy as a regulated activity, I mean, that doesn't happen. All kinds of amazing stuff goes on. All right, so then I asked it, well, what questions are relevant in the Cambodian context? So I'm trying to see if I can get actual useful information from it. And so again, we're back in the survey design loop, and we get really general answers and no useful information. So if you did ask number 1, they'll simply parrot the government line. But the fact is that they all sell fake medicines. And if you asked for 5, you could ask different questions to get that information, but you would want other methods to find that material out. right, so where does this leave us? Okay, so as I said, the topic is what the article is about, but the topic should be focused by the predicated knowledge. So we need to look at the topics before we allow our students to write. So this is an example that I have, a little excerpt, and this is what I give my students. You know, an F topic is too broad, a C or D topic needs a narrower focus, and then here's a good topic. So we need to be able to see and vet their research topic, their focus. We need to set clear requirements for bibliography, and we need to check on them. One thing we can do is show students the difference between good summarizers, AI-powered summarizers, and GPT. I use a synthesis matrix. So this is where you ask people to go through and create a kind of table where they've got the different bibliographic citations at the top in the columns, and then in the rows, the specific information that those articles share. And this is one way of ensuring that they have actually gone through and understood the concepts involved, and you can ensure a decent level of knowledge. I also require every introduction paragraph to synthesize material from at least 3 sources. So this kind of interrupts the GPT thing of writing very low-level simplistic content. We need to teach people how to write surveys and how to write interview questions, and we need to check that their objectives are appropriate, and we need to check their questions. I personally find it useful to theme my course, at least to use as an example and have an example theme, so that they see the complexity of content. All right, so for AI use, if you are teaching a lit review, you may want to ban it because it could teach them to write at a very low level. So I think you teach lit review in 150, so that might be a case for that task for banning it. But then in 210, so this is something Dennis and I have been discussing, we're not actually teaching it. We need them to do it, but we're not teaching how to do it. And so we may want them to use GPT or AI summarizers or that kind of thing. So there's some possible policy language there. Now, method is really complicated because it has so many subsections. So when you ask GPT about participant characteristics, you get this kind of list. Not all of this is relevant, but it's a good place to start, and it will get students thinking. At the same time, there are some things that you cannot ask people about. And so one needs to be aware of privacy issues. Now, when you ask it about instrument, as we know, it's not very good with surveys. These questions just made me laugh. Question number 1 is very vague and potentially, it will involve illegality. Almost every unlicensed medicine seller in Cambodia is involved with corruption and illegality. So you really won't get an straightforward answer if you ask that. Better to ask them for a work history. Number 2 is actually 2 questions, and this use of the word "and" here, this is exactly what how one teaches people not to write survey or interview questions. So there are all kinds of problems with these questions. Now, number 4 is possible. There probably aren't typical customers, but that's a viable question. Number 9 involves face threatening because almost certainly they don't have any education, but you could do that. You could achieve that end by asking them for their biography. But essentially, GPT writes like we're all sitting somewhere in America. At the same time, it doesn't acknowledge that if we were sitting in America, we would have a much higher level of education. All right, so GPT responds to whatever you ask it. It doesn't think. So I asked it, how do ethnic tensions impact unlicensed medicine sellers in Cambodia? And it replied that it is possible that ethnic tensions in Cambodia may impact it. It's like, yeah, you think. So it can't focus on detail. When we're talking about academic work, it has to be very highly focused in order to make any kind of contribution to the field. And it has to get the detail right. So again, this looks like something that can be used in 210, but probably should not be used with graduate students. When I asked it about sampling, so this, you might use purposive sampling or snowball sampling. This is just funny, but it's a borderline error. There are circumstances, if you understand your circumstances, then you understand which one you choose, and it wouldn't be this or that. It would be one or the other, but certainly not either. And then I asked it again for information on sampling, and individuals from different cultural, linguistics, and socioeconomic background. That survey is too broad. That suggests your sampling is screwed up, and you need to think again. And then here, ensure that the sample is representative of the population being studied. Yes and no. Mostly GPT writes as though you intend to generalize to a national sample, but it may not be that you want to generalize to a national sample. So same conclusion, it's okay for 210 perhaps, but not for grads. All right, for data analysis, again, very generalized advice. It's frankly not a whole load of use because we're not teaching descriptive or inferential statistics. The advice on qualitative analysis is 15 years out of date. So normally, this is all done on software now. If you know to ask GPT about software, GPT will recommend specific software programs that will do this for you. So I asked it about it, and that's what it did. But then you're stuck in the problem that we noticed last time. If you know enough to ask, then you don't need to ask. All right, so regarding methods of qualitative data analysis, there are a couple of free websites that I send my 210 students to. This is because humans are not very reliable as coders. We pat the puppy, or we make a cup of tea, or we get tired, or whatever. Whereas the software, the online website, can do it in 1 second, and it will do it perfectly. All right, so basically, GPT is not really very reliable in all areas. It gave advice that was way out of date. All right, so GPT is quite good at writing explanations and training material to teach students how to analyze their data. If you're very specific, you can ask it to explain the standard deviation of the mean and how to calculate it, and it will do that. It will tell you how to build a chart or a graph. It will identify complementary data sources that you can go to. It will say, try this website at the CDC or something. It can give you advice on research ethics or method options for data analysis and so on. However, all of these suffer from the same issues with error and incompleteness that we saw with the surveys. Furthermore, it's just a lot easier to use a lot of no-code AI-powered sites that are already out there and that are better than GPT. So if you're going to do this with multiple prompts to GPT and revising and revising and revising, that takes a lot of time. Our students often already are using Monkey Learn or Click. So these are websites that you can upload your data to, and it will crunch your data for you, spit out the relevant statistics, and it will also do data visualizations. Now, where I've been elsewhere, people have felt a bit anxious about this when they're teaching writing. We don't actually need to do that work ourselves. What we need to do is to recommend to our students that they do that work on those websites. And that's actually a whole load better than GPT. All right, so there are some possible policies. In our writing program, we teach so many different courses and so many different tasks. I'm just giving a few, but it's really hard for me to even imagine what would be relevant to different tasks. One option is to ask students to give them reporting requirements. So if they're going to use one of those, so in the task description, be very clear about required uses of AI. For example, the summarizers. For example, creating one data visualization. And explain to them how this relates to the course learning goals. And then they cite the website that they have used in their reference list. So, we already have students cite websites. That's all very normal. You can ask for a student contract. So this is where you state clearly what they should use GPT for, what they must, what they may, and what they must not use particular AI tools for. And then you could also have them complete a work audit. And so this is where they get screenshots of the prompts they used and of GPT replies. So those are just some ideas. They may be relevant to your course or your task. All right, so in the results section, again, GPT is like overly general and simplistic. So it talks about using frequencies without really understanding them. The point of a frequency is to be able to say what participants thought was important, but it doesn't mention co-frequencies. It can't really connect the results to participants and their context, their real-world context, and it can't reliably identify patterns. It can't identify significance, and that's an absolutely crucial element of this. If we can't identify why we are doing this, if we can't say why it's important, then I'm not sure why we're doing it. To date, GPT cannot analyze charts and graphs, so I uploaded my data, fine, can't upload anything else. DALL-E and others can analyze charts and graphs. All right, so for us, our role, basically GPT is a really good place for students to start because it supports them. And they can use it to get their work going in a method section. But we have to give clear and detailed instructions about the subparts of that. The methods section is the petrol, it's the engine, it drives everything else in the study. So the need for predicate knowledge is important, and local context is important. We only do this for the results. So in Cambodia, we are only doing this to try to make sure that in future, people aren't selling medicines that don't work, and so people die. There are reasons why we do academic work. All right, so teaching students how to see the significance, how to write about the significance, this is central to what we can do and what AI cannot do. The consequences are significantly worse for graduate students than for undergraduate students if they don't understand these issues. So if they're using GPT in a casual or unthinking way, if they don't provide us with, what we have required them to do in our task guidelines, the graduate students will fail in a much more significant way. At the same time, if the undergraduates don't learn this effectively in our courses, they will have difficulty in their capstone projects. We also really need to teach data privacy and security. So this goes to the fact that previously Microsoft tried to have, with Microsoft Academic and with OpenAlex, tried to have us all do our work online. And basically, the academic community around the world told them to fly a kite. Essentially, people do not share their data sets. And the idea that you would upload your data set is just not something you ask people to do. So this is something that we should be teaching. When you're in 210, when you're in second year, it doesn't matter a lot. But by the time you're a grad student, it does matter. All right, so there are useful ways to use GPT, to use AI with undergraduates. This is an example honor declaration. So you may wish to limit how much they depend on it intellectually. This is one possibility for task-related policies. Okay, so in the discussion section, GPT is really bad at writing discussions. For the same reason it's bad at summaries, it just oversimplifies. So when I put in our discussion section and I asked it to respond, I asked it, how would you summarize this? How would you interpret this? How would you evaluate this? And it basically produced exactly the same response for 5 of the 6 of these. So it doesn't really distinguish very effectively between things that you want to do in your discussion section. All right, so to sum up, GPT is coming out in a few months. Helen, the claim is that it will have AGI. The claim right now is that it will have the same abilities as a human. And they're throwing a huge amount of money at it. If GPT can be taught to determine our intentions, to assess what is the likely significance, why do I have the questions I have about unlicensed medicine sellers in Cambodia? if it can assess context, if it can do personality psychology, if it can make decisions, then almost everything in this PowerPoint will be obsolete. So at the same time, because I've been interested in this whole situation, I've been looking at the need for university teachers. At the moment, there are about 250 million university students, and that's less than half of the demand out there. So if GPT is a smart teacher, we will still need other teachers because most of those people can't afford to pay for GPT services. All right, so I guess that's the one bit of good news I can share. Also, there are serious legal challenges heating up, and these may limit, at least to some degree, what GPT can scrape from the data.